Good morning, Dr. Anne Webster. It must be an issue that's been happening for a while now, but the constituents must be really concerned about this, no doubt.
Look, they are. Good morning, James. Great to talk with you. We have lost 25% of our banking institutions in regional and remote Australia since over a 4-year period to June 2021. That is a lot in small places. So we've had 2,500 originally back 4 years ago, and now we're down to 1,900. So, you know, it is a significant closure. You mentioned some of them, and I'm sure there are others as well. And consequently, a lot of people have come to me and said, what can you do? Not much, really. It's a banking commercial decision that they have made. What I'm pleased about is that our government has formed a task force under Minister Michael Sukkar and Senator Perrin Davies, one of my good friends in Parliament, and they are wanting to find solutions. So in some places we've had, you know, Australia Post has taken on the job, but that was something that Christine Holgate fought for. However, some of those are no longer working either. So, yeah, look, it's a big issue.
It must be hard, though, when you see all these bank closures happen, and as you said, there's not much you can really do about it. How do you feel this task force might be able to help, though?
Well, the task force will determine outcomes that will improve banking services in regional and remote towns. So the task force itself makes up come from 85 banks and credit unions, 38 small business organisations from the Council of Small Business Organisations, 530 councils from across Australia, and 160 business associations through the Australian Chamber of Commerce and 3,500 local post offices. So all of those people will be feeding into the task force solutions-focused approach. And I'm really pleased to say that one of the roundtables will be happening here in Mildura on January 19, and prior to that date, I will organise a tele-town hall. It could even be in person, James. That could be pretty exciting.
That would be very exciting.
I know, but a tele-town hall with some of our stakeholders, and particularly, obviously, the co-chairs. And that will give people opportunities to talk about what has happened and what they would like to see happen going forward. The simple solution, of course, is to push the banks, of which we have no control, to open their branches again. But it is a commercial decision, and so we have to find solutions that work for our residents. That's critical.
Yeah, as you said, it is a commercial decision made by the banks. They're really doing everything they can to move people online. Who are you hearing from the most? Which constituents in the population are affected most when banks close in small towns?
Yeah, look, our older generations who have gone into their bank, you know, every week for their transactions, business transactions, as you know, farmers, as well as the local transactions, they have been really hit hard. And to say, well, they just need to get digital savvy, I, like you, use an app, and I'm really grateful for the simplicity of that and the fact that it works. It's a miracle. And then, you know, for some older people, that's easier said than done. Often their phones aren't smartphones. They don't know how to work these apps. And unless they've got a grandkid who can come along and say, this is how it's done, you know, it's easier said than done. So some people have to travel a long way to a larger town to be able to access that service. And, you know, once again, it really highlights the difference between the urban and the regional and rural issues that we face. And so, look, I'm really pleased that this task force is going to happen, is happening now, and that we're putting some wheels in motion to find solutions.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those wheels and how people can get involved. You mentioned some meetings that you'll hopefully have in real life coming up over the next couple of months. I know it sounds crazy, but there we go. But people can also get in touch via email, I believe.
Look, absolutely, they can. I'm very happy to receive emails and information from residents across Mallee, and submissions, which I'm happy to pass on, or people can send a submission directly to regionalbanking@treasury.gov.au. I'll say that again. Regional banking, all one word, at treasury.gov.au. And if they want to send a snail mail, it could be very snail at this time of year, but it will be to the Secretariat at Regional Banking Task Force, Financial Systems Division, the Treasury, Langton Crescent, Parks, ACT 2500. If people want to just email me or ring the office, I can give it to them in, more directly.
Yeah, that's great. Dr. Anne Webster is with you. She is the local member for Mallee here on ABC Mildura Swan Hill. James Finlay with you here this morning. It is 18 minutes to 9. Dr. Anne, before you go, I just wanted to bring up something with you this week that we've seen the protests in Melbourne, and you've been quite vocal about your opposition to the state government's proposed pandemic laws. We don't know what's going to happen to them now. You spoke on Sky News earlier in the week saying that you would have been at the protests if you'd been in Melbourne, and as you would have seen on the news, the protests did turn quite dark. Death threats and nooses being carried around the streets of Melbourne and a mock hanging of the Premier outside Parliament, like pretty ugly scenes.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible.
Not great. The state government leader, state opposition leader, Matthew Guy, said yesterday that this is a report in The Age today, we're very concerned about everyone's safety, whether it be the Premiers or any Member of Parliament. And he added that, knowing that those elements were the protests now, that the Liberal Party MPs wouldn't be going to these anymore. And said that, we don't want anything to do with it. Yesterday, the Prime Minister also condemned the violence.
Well, of course, those threats and intimidation has no place in Australia. We're a civil, peaceful society. Where we have disagreements, we don't handle them with violence. And there can be no tolerance for that. And there should be no tolerance for that. No matter how frustrated people might be, that is never the answer. And there needs to be the respect shown in those debates that we have. There has to be an appropriate balance and civility.
Knowing what happened and how things have panned out now, is that really the protest that you would have wanted to be at now?
Well, I think we need to, firstly, I want to say that I absolutely agree with the Prime Minister. There is no acceptable way that you can align with that kind of violence and imagery. It appalls me on every level and appalls me in other protests as well. Do we then conflate the issue of the nuffers who behave that way and the issues that they're protesting about? The reality is that I have very ordinary Aussies who have said to me they have been down to the protest. They are small business owners. They might be medical staff. They would go down to the protest. And the point is that Victorians must be able to utilise their free democratic rights to protest peacefully. And I think that the numbers of people who have been involved in the protests and the way that, generally speaking, other than the two incidences that you talk about quite rightly and abhor, quite rightly, generally speaking, people want the government to know they are not okay with this legislation. And who knows, James, maybe Adam Somyurek is doing a little bit of redemption work here. I'm not going to even question his motivation. Let's just leave that aside. But he's talking about standing against and not voting for the legislation. And I think it's the opportunity to really deal with those issues around detention powers and the fact that they have no external appeals process at the moment in the legislation that's before the upper house, and also the lack of democratic process in Parliament, that there's no parliamentary scrutiny or oversight. A committee that has a majority of the government on it is not independent scrutiny. And, look, there are serious issues with this legislation. It needs to be. I'm really pleased with the number of people who are engaging in it, people who are normally not involved in politics at all, talking to me, and they have grave concerns, and so they should.
But the images that we're seeing from the protests, still something that you would have attended?
Well, I think that you've got to look at the number of people who were peacefully demonstrating. And for those who were there, they tell me that the vast majority of people were sensible, concerned Australians. And the more sensible, concerned Australians that are involved, the better. The people who ought to be locked up because of their behaviour ought to be locked up. It is a police issue that the police need to deal with. So, we don't want to throw away our liberties in terms of our right to peacefully protest because there are some rough elements who have their own agenda and represent their own issues rather than the genuine issues of the protest. And it's really sad that, that those behaviours have been highlighted, to shame them really, and rightfully so. But the actual issues in the border protests taking place against the pandemic legislation and also against the mandating of vaccinations, which the Prime Minister did come out and talk about yesterday, I'm really pleased to say, ought to be held, be fire in the government's feet. We should be holding fire to the government's feet about these issues.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying, Dr. Webster. But with the Prime Minister and Matthew Guy, the opposition leaders, now saying MPs shouldn't go. Well, maybe not the Prime Minister. He hasn't said that MPs shouldn't go, but the Matthew Guy has. If there were protests and you were in Melbourne, say this weekend, would you still go, or have you changed your mind there?
I think I would be very interested. I think that protesting is a right that we have and that we should be able to utilise. I would engage in the protest, provided it was peaceful. I mean, none of us want to be harmed in our right to walk quietly and to walk with placards or whatever you want to do. But to peacefully protest is something that we value and we need to hold on to as part of our democracy, because there is so little power that people have had over a 2-year period. It doesn't mean that you align with those people who have behaved in abhorrent fashion. It does not mean that at all.
Dr. Anne Webster, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and enjoy your weekend with more freedoms. Have you got anything planned?
Well, not wearing a mask. Awesome.
That will be great, won't it?
Yes.
We'll chat to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Authorised by Anne Webster, The Nationals, Mildura.